The birth of the vampire. Traces of Khastran's spirit had survived his demise. Not long enough to reform on their own, but with the help from his few remaining demon followers and their powerful dark magics, Khastran's soul was restored. Before his followers could revive his body, which they most likely would not have been able to do, at least not as it was without the Creator, Drasark, detecting the rise of Khastran's unique spirit, intervened. All of Khastran's followers were slain in the battle, but Khastran's demonic spirit still managed to flee across the universe until he eventually reached our planet, Earth. This was no chance meeting, however. Khastran had a history with our planet. He first visited over 1 billion years ago, in a period of our history that is completely lost from the fossil record. The period in question spans over 1 billion years, and it is known during that time that a race of amphibian creatures called Esquilons, completely unrelated to all life on the planet in our time, were the dominant species. The Echeinzus, meanwhile, were the dominant life forms out of the Esquilons, and built a massive, thriving civilization. Sadly, its history is unknown. We are only aware that they exist at all because one of them became a member of the circus family, though he understandably wasn't eager to discuss what became of his people. All Esquilons were driven to extinction by Khastran. In fact, the demon killed all life on the planet at that point and sterilized its surface. In spite of this, other life forms did develop several 100 million years later. Single-celled amoeba, from which all life as we know it on Earth today, from mammals to reptiles to insects, evolved. This amoeba, however, only appeared through completely unrelated means. Again, one incarnation of the circus family travelling back and seeding the Earth with these simple one-celled life forms. The reason Khastran destroyed our world in particular, beyond his usual cruelty, was actually because one of his former, treacherous minions had stumbled upon the planet and hoped to turn its people into an army against him. Still, whilst Khastran killed all life on the planet, he did not destroy it completely, as he would normally do. He sensed that it had a unique magical structure that could prove useful to him in the future. This had also been why his minion had used the Earth too. Our world was somewhat unique in the universe, in that it contained the magic from several different worlds. There are two kinds of magic in each natural universe: universal magic that runs throughout each universe itself, and magic that is unique to each world. In the case of the Earth, meanwhile, it was created from two planets that fused together 4.5 billion years ago. One of these two worlds, known as Thea, was populated by a highly advanced race of wizards who attempted to prevent the collision, which obviously was unsuccessful, or else we wouldn't be here to write about it. Whilst the Theans were tragically killed off, their spell did work in the sense that it preserved the magics rather than people of their world after the collision, which then merged with the magic of the planet it had collided with to create something seemingly unique in at least our universe. Whilst other planets have collided, normally the magic of both worlds dies and is replaced by that of a new world. Furthermore, the Thean spell would slowly but surely, over the history of the Earth, draw in and preserve magic from dead planets across the universe. Normally, when a world dies, its magics may linger on for a short while after, before fading into the universe at large. But the Earth now acted like a magnet, drawing these dead worlds' magic in thanks to the Theans' preservative spell, acting in a similar, unintended way for these other worlds. Whilst this gave our people a wider and more powerful range of magics to utilize, at certain points this also spelled disaster for the Earth. Magic evolves, just like natural organisms, though certain ancient spells can be preserved through rituals and enchantments. Sometimes the magics from different planets in the Earth could evolve in a way that was hostile to one another. Most of the time, this simply resulted in the magics of the Earth being unstable, but in some cases it could lead to abnormalities, and in others it could lead to widespread disaster. The worst example of this was the Great Dying, an extinction event which killed off up to 90% of life on our planet in the Permian era over 200 million years ago. This was caused by two planets' magics pulling at each other under the surface of the Earth, which very nearly tore the planet apart. Among the casualties of the Great Dying were the synapsids, a gigantic race of reptiles who had ruled over the Earth for millions of years. One group of synapsids did survive, however, the cynodonts, who several million years after the Great Dying evolved into the first mammals, though even then our ancestors were suppressed by a group of reptiles known as the dinosaurs, who took over after the Great Dying and ruled the Earth for over 170 million years. Khastran remembered our planet 1 billion years later, when his soul was desperate, and hoped to use magics of the Earth to help restore his body. Thankfully for the rest of the creation, even the powerful magics of the Earth were not enough to restore Khastran completely, but he still used them to not only possess the dead Tyrannosaurus rex, but mutate and twist its body to become strong enough to hold his essence. In this new Tyrannosaurus rex body, which Khastran kept from now on, he wasn't even half as powerful as before, but was still stronger than any other demon and strong enough to take on any god. The first thing Khastran did in his Tyrannosaur body was to kill off most of the dinosaurs on Earth. The few he spared, the vile demon transformed into his new army of hell beasts, which he took to the stars to corrupt more creatures into being part of his ever-growing army to take back the hellish realm. Ironically, however, had it not been for Khastran, then humanity would never have existed, as it was only through his slaughter of the dinosaurs that mammals had the chance to take over and humanity evolve in the first place. Still, whilst the dinosaurs were driven to extinction on Earth by Khastran, they survived on several other planets around the universe. Many centuries prior to Khastran's visit to our world, a race of aliens known as the Raskians had abducted several dinosaurs in order to use them in battle. The Raskians, who originated in the solar system just outside of ours, were caught in the middle of a civil war. Having discovered alien life in our system, the more dominant side of the war were able to use mind-controlled dinosaurs, such as the infamous Tyrannosaurus rex, to slaughter their enemies. Following this, the winners of the war expanded and created colonies on numerous other worlds, some of which they inhabited. Others they transformed into breeding grounds for dinosaurs, who they still utilized for a variety of means. Among the breeding grounds they used for dinosaurs included Venus, which at that point in its history was inhabited by nothing more than amphibian creatures, which the dinosaurs came to dominate, much like they did to the mammals on Earth. Tragically, the Raskians' home planet was also destroyed by Khastran after he took to the stars again, ironically in his Tyrannosaur body. A few isolated colonies, including Venus, did survive, however, simply because Khastran overlooked them in his quest to find more advanced planets to take over. Whilst he had been happy to use the dinosaurs at first, he now wanted intelligent species who could build him magical weapons. The dinosaurs on these few surviving remote Raskian colonies continued to flourish and evolve into new forms over the course of the next 66 million years. On Venus, a race of highly intelligent dinosaurs eventually emerged, who mastered magic rather than science. These dinosaurs understandably grew scared of the universe after witnessing several disasters and invasions of Earth and the death of Mars, and created a magical barrier around Venus to protect it from invaders. This barrier not only protected Venus physically, however, it also created an illusion that Venus was an inhospitable planet to any life form that came near. This even fooled humanity for centuries into thinking that Venus was a gas giant. We later discovered the truth, of course, in the 23rd century, though we will cover that later. The Creator, meanwhile, was devastated by Khastran's survival. Even he had underestimated his power And as the demon destroyed countless more worlds beyond the Earth and Raskia with a renewed vigour, the creator finally decided to stamp out evil throughout the Omniverse. By this stage, he had created thousands of realms, all of which were linked together. Again, whilst travel was easier between universes that existed within realms, it was still possible to travel to any reality within this Omniverse from another. The creator believed that the only way he could eliminate evil is if the darkness was removed from himself. He did not think this would make him vulnerable, like the angels, as unlike them, he had experienced and committed evil both before and after he became the creator, and therefore could know how to avoid it. Sadly, however, the creator underestimated his own power. When he tried to remove the corruption from his body, it instead formed into a new being, due to having been created from the remains of ethereals who the creator thought were long dead. The ethereals' will to survive ultimately remained strong enough, even within the creator after all these billions of years, to form a new entity from the darkness he removed, one of equal power to the creator, yet with none of his positive qualities. This entity came to be known as the Destroyer. It, and the new, completely benevolent creator, were subsequently locked within a war for millions of years. The creator did his best to take the battle outside of the Omniverse to protect his children. But sadly, in the void, the Destroyer created his own realm of hideous abominations that were known as monsters. Much like the word demon or beast, monster in the modern world has come to refer to any cruel, twisted, or unnatural creature. I myself have regularly used it in such a way, and I apologize for any confusion. In its correct sense, however, monster refers to any creature born within the Destroyer's single isolated realm, which is not part of the Creator's Omniverse. The sole purpose of monsters was to destroy all life within our Omniverse. At first, the Creator rallied his creations together to battle them, whilst he took on their father, who had built a protective force field around his single realm that even the Creator couldn't enter. The Creator, however, sick at having to sacrifice his creations in a pointless war and curb their development, devised a new realm within the Omniverse, with a new race of life forms whose sole purpose was to fight the monsters. These creatures were christened goblins. The goblin realm was still part of the Omega or Sentenza Omniverse, but travel from it to any other part of the Omniverse was considerably easier, as was travel to the Void too. The creator felt guilt at creating a race to battle against the monsters, but he had no choice. He needed help, and a race of automatons could never hope to outwit living, thinking creatures like monsters. At the very least, by creating a race who had no purpose other than to fight, they would not know there was any alternative like his other creations. Ultimately, however, even some of the goblins broke free from the creator's conditioning, in much the same way as some angels turned to the dark side, and some demons became benevolent. These goblins deserted the army and became outlaws, travelling the Omniverse, sampling whatever they could to satisfy their own hedonistic urges. The influence of these renegades, ironically, led to goblins being seen as greedy and selfish creatures in early Earth legends and folklore. Whilst the war between the Creator and the Destroyer and the goblins and monsters waged on, the rest of the Omniverse was able to seemingly continue functioning. In secret, however, the Destroyer was preparing another weapon, the Mystic Realm. The Destroyer, for all his arrogance, knew that it was a possibility that he might die, and so he created a backup plan to create another member of his kind, so to speak. The Mystic Realm was pure power that was designed to latch itself onto the first truly sentient creature that entered it and make them as powerful as either the Creator or the Destroyer. The Destroyer couldn't simply travel into the Omniverse and pick a successor, as the Creator would know instantly. Whilst neither were omnipotent, both could sense each other, especially within the Omniverse. Instead, by connecting the mystic realm to the Omniverse from outside, the the destroyer could avoid detection for a short period. Furthermore, once the mystic realm had time to latch itself onto the Omniverse, then removing it would risk unravelling the entire Semtenza Omniverse itself. Whilst there was always the possibility that a benevolent creature could enter the mystic realm, the destroyer believed that power of that kind would ultimately corrupt any being, leading to another creature like him eventually. Still, in spite of this, the destroyer did attempt to ensure that Khastran would gain this power, and place the only portal to the mystic realm in the Earth. Khastran, who was still connected to the Earth, as he was still possessing a Tyrannosaurus, an Earth creature, instantly sensed the presence of the mystic realm. He was also able to sense it above even the strongest wizard on Earth, due to his power. It took the destroyer many years to construct the mystic realm, though this was only partly due to the war. It was finally ready during a period of Earth's history known as the Age of Magic. After the death of the dinosaurs on Earth, mammals emerged to become the dominant land vertebrates, and human beings eventually evolved from primitive primates. Early man then discovered tools, which later led to the discovery of primitive magics too, which they ultimately used to defeat their rivals, the Neanderthals, after the latter had almost driven humanity to extinction and end the Ice Age. Over the ensuing centuries, humanity's use of magic transformed the Earth into a magical world. It is possible, through repeated overexposure to certain strains of magic, to rewrite the natural laws completely, transforming natural creatures into magical creatures. The magical counterparts of humans are known as wizards, whilst the magical counterparts to dinosaurs are dragons. Witches and warlocks, meanwhile, are merely people who use magic, but have not let it transform them completely yet. The Age of Magic is still an elusive and mysterious time for us. Some of the few records that exist from that period paint it as a paradise, and it's obvious that humanity was incredibly advanced, in some respects more so than we are even now. The civilization of magic was able to build incredible crafts that could travel through space, and even discovered the secrets of time travel. Hundreds of thousands of years later, the Vandals used the leftovers of these spells to construct the circus family's tent, but more on that later. Still, at the same time, many of the darkest curses and magics also came from this time, suggesting that it wasn't quite as rosy as the few documents have made it out to be. Whatever the truth, the Age of Magic came to an end when Khastran and his vile horde of demons invaded the Earth. Wanting to see what the new power he sensed was, Khastran and his horde were merciless in their treatment of humanity. They exterminated most of the population, but kept a few thousand alive to torture and experiment on them for their own amusement, whilst Khastran investigated the Earth. Khastran attempted to keep his investigation of the Earth a secret, but soon one of his agents betrayed him outside of his base due to the vast amount of enemies he had. Even Khastran was vulnerable, but the vile creature's greed and desire for power overran his better instincts. After his location on the Earth was exposed, a horde of demons, angels, gods, and creatures from other realms attacked our world to try and finally finish Khastran. Drasak took part in the final battle, hoping to strike the killing blow and finish his sworn enemy. Khastran tore his rival's body and soul to pieces, scattering his physical remains across the Earth. Whilst Dasarak was denied of his chance for revenge, his final actions did at least distract Khastran long enough for the gods and the angels to infiltrate Khastran's defences. A battle was fought, and whilst thousands of angels and gods would die, in the end, Khastran was mortally wounded by his enemies. Knowing that there was no way he could escape back to his base, Khastran hid in a cave where he hoped to ensure a means for his eventual revival. With the aid of his human servants, Khastran sought to create a new species of demon that could bring him back at a later date, after the gods and angels had left. Khastran's human servants were made up of the most twisted and evil people on earth, who Khastran had spared, and who had to prove themselves to him. It's not known what they had to do in order to accomplish that, but it's probably for the best that we don't know. Khastran's first attempt to create a new race of demons were the Turek-Han, who, though powerful, were savage creatures, incapable of much higher thought. Khastran needed a race that could infiltrate humanity and survive long enough to bring him back centuries from now. His next attempt saw Khastran create a book made from his flesh and inked in his own blood. Each page of this book, which would simply be known as the Book of Khastran, could transform a human into the first of a new race of blood-drinking demons, who could then turn other humans into members of their kind. When these demons, the children of Khastran, outnumbered humanity, the dominant natural creatures of the earth, then Khastran would live again. The children of Khastran later became known to us as vampires, and they would be overall the most evil and persistent predators of humanity. After creating the book, Khastran also devised a small pocket dimension, which would only come into being over hundreds of years. If it came into being now, then the angels and gods would have surely sensed and destroyed it before it could permanently fuse itself to the earth. This pocket dimension acted as an afterlife to the vampires, with all of their souls being sent there after death. This way, if the vampire race were ever exterminated, their souls could theoretically be brought back from this dimension. A vampire's soul was only sent there if they had died on Earth, however. Finally, Khastran also created demonic wolf creatures, Zoltans, whose job was to serve the vampires. After leaving the Book of Khastran with his vile human servants, Khastran went to face the army of angels, gods, and demons who had been searching for him, and had no idea about the creation of his children. He took down hundreds of his enemies in his death throes, before the army finally destroyed both Khastran's tyrannosaur body and his soul. After the demons' destruction, the gods and angels returned to their own realms, whilst the hellish realm was thrown into chaos, as many demons tried to claim Khastran and Dasarak's throne, though none of them were able to command the same power that either of these two demons had. Most of Khastran's species, the Cardons, were killed off in their war too, though a small section that had become Khastran's favourite soldiers were imprisoned deep within the Earth's core. They were trapped there by the warrior god, Astuk, who had accidentally botched the only weapon capable of killing these abominations, and instead used its power to seal them deep in Earth's core. In the years after Khastran's death, his cult created the first vampires from the survivors of humanity. The Earth had been left mostly barren by Khastran and his horde. Almost all magic had been drained from the Earth, and there were only a couple of thousand humans scattered across the planet into small communities, barely surviving. Just before his battle with Rak, Khastran had figured out what the mystic realm really was. He hoped that when his vampiric children would revive him, he could not only rule over the entire Omniverse, but absorb both the Creator and the Destroyer and other ethereal realities, in the hopes of conquering and tormenting any world or universe that emerged from the void. The Destroyer was aware of this, but didn't care. As long as chaos and suffering infested the void, that was all that mattered. That is assuming he didn't kill the Creator anyway, after which he would simply destroy the Omniverse and carry on his war against all life. Either way, he won. This period of Earth's history after Khastran's attack are known simply as the Lost Years. Aside from vampires, it saw the creation of many demonic races and creatures that continue to plague humanity to this day. The vampires' sworn enemies, the Vandals, were also created during this time, ironically by the last survivor of the cult of Khastran. Initially, this cult, who were granted immortality by Khastran, but not turned into demons, commanded and guided the vampires as they were supposed to. But sadly, being Khastran's children, it didn't take long for the first vampires to turn on and slaughter the cult of Khastran, and use the book for themselves. For a while, the vampires were able to work together to some extent and build a giant city in the wasteland of the earth. Ultimately, however, their treachery saw them turn on one another, which they would always do in one way or another, and the book, whilst indestructible to all forces on earth, subsequently fell into numerous different powers and individual hands over the course of human history, which led to the creation of vampire species all over the world. The last of the cult, meanwhile, known as Mackenziak, vowed revenge on the vampires for their betrayal and searched for any way to destroy them. He eventually found it in the last piece of Drasak, a tiny fragment of the former Demon King's arm that had been scattered just below the remains of a mountain had endured. It had become a hotspot as a result for demons, but Mackenziak, having witnessed the creation of the Book of Khastran, applied a similar process, albeit crudely, to create a similar book. Just like the Book of Khastran, each page could transform a human into the first of a new species of demon, one which was able to devour the souls of its victims using its claws. These clawed soul devourers came to be known as Vandals. They were similar to vampires in many respects. Each species of Vandal could transform others into members of their own kind, allowing their species to spread at a similar rate. Again, however, this book was crude when compared with Khastran's. It was not indestructible like his book, and no matter how many Vandals were created, Dinosaurs could not live again. Still, at the very least, this rival race of demons battled with the vampires throughout the remainder of human history. Whilst their creator Mackenziak fed the Vandals propaganda that the vampires were their enemies, their hatred for vampires endured even after the vampires found and killed Mackenziak and largely airbrushed him from history. Their hatred of vampires was actually instinctive. It stemmed from their father's feud, which had lasted for over 66 million years. Vandals and vampires, who knew nothing about their history or creators, were still being driven to murder each other. Aside from vampires and vandals, werewolves were also created during this period. These demonic wolf hybrids were the descendants of a race of ancient demons known as the Lycans. Along with the Cardons, Lycans were among those the creator granted incredible power to for his final test between good and evil, though they were not anywhere near as strong as Khastran. The Lycans were simple beasts in terms of intelligence, though they still possessed a savagery and sadism unknown to any animal. They were Khastran's favourite pets. Really, they were the only creatures that he didn't treat with cruelty. It had been speculated that he admired their simplicity and viciousness, but whatever the reason, the Lycans were among those who remained loyal to him. Their leader, or rather Alpha, Khastran, even died on the earth defending Khastran. Khastran's spirit, however, survived, unknown to the gods, though it still remained dormant for many centuries after Khastran's death. In the lost years, however, Khastran's spirit was finally revived by a warlock named Darok. Magic had slowly begun to grow back since Khastran's invasion, though only the most skilled could harness it in its current state. Darok, meanwhile, initially used his magic to battle the demons that were slowly infesting the earth, which turned him from a simple farmer whose village was constantly under attack to a hero overnight. It wasn't just vampires and vandals humanity had to deal with, but other demon species of various kinds left over from Khastran's war. In time, however, Darok found a way to control certain strains of Daemonak, which granted him power over demons like no other warlock before him. Sadly, however, this in turn slowly led to Darok's corruption. He summoned an army of demons to gain power over many of the smaller villagers, believing that it was his destiny to unite both demons and humans together under his benevolent rule. Instead, he united them in hatred against him, and after losing his army and power, Darroch retreated to the site of Hysken's death. The area, thanks to the lichen spirit, had become another hotspot for demons, but Darroch, in his insane lust for power, attempted to harness the dark energy there, being unaware that it was Hysken's spirit. Hysken awoke, and subsequently possessed one of the wolves in a nearby forest, simply because it was the nearest body in Darroch's base where he conducted the ritual. Dazed and confused in his new wolf body, Hysken slaughtered his way through the woods, wounding Darroch before the warlock was finally able to put his soul to rest once more. In the body of the wolf, Hysken was a mere shell of his former self, both physically and mentally. Unfortunately, however, the wound Hysken inflicted on Darroch infected him. Lichens had a special kind of poison in their claws and teeth called lycanthropy, which could poison virtually any other supernatural creature, from other demons to gods and angels. The only creatures that were immune to it were the Cardons, and those they created, such as vampires, vandals, and later ghouls. Lycanthropy, however, had a certain effect on natural creatures, and instead transformed them into similar, albeit less powerful, lichens. The combination of Hysken's spirit, mixed in with his new wolf body, created a new strain of lycanthropy, however, wherein Darroch transformed into a hideous wolf-lichen hybrid, a werewolf. Darroch, whilst unable to cure the curse of lycanthropy, still limited its influence over him. The only reason he was able to do that was because the lycanthropy had been diluted with wolf blood, and Hysken was weaker at the time too. Darroch's magic ensured that he only transformed into the lichen wolf form on the night of the full moon, as well as all other nights in the week it came, as he had been bitten on the night of the full moon, having attempted to use its powers for his spell. The moon, like any planetary body, contains its own magics, which can shine on the earth and be used by witches, demons, and all manner of creatures for their own ends. In this wolf form, Darroch had no control, however, and became a complete monster. Whilst even Darroch tried to restrain himself, sadly, his attempts at restraint failed. In his wolf form, Darroch subsequently infected more people and spread this new demonic curse throughout humanity. Still, Darroch constantly tried to find a way to cure himself, and whilst he never succeeded, he did find a way to control the wolf to the point where he could not only change whenever he wanted to, he could control it too. This led to a new breed of werewolf, Lycanthropus extremus, created from those Darroch infected after his experiments. Other strains of werewolves would emerge in the ensuing centuries through other means, such as the famous white wolverons, who were the children born of two werewolves, when the female was in her wolf form. White wolverons had no humanity whatsoever, and those they infected became less powerful dark wolverons, who remained the wolf full time after changing. Wolfmen, meanwhile, who were the least powerful, would be born to two werewolves in the female's human form. Overall, werewolves, due to carrying the curse of lycanthropy, became among the most feared demon species. Ironically, vampires were among the few species that they allied themselves with, mirroring the relationship between their forebears. Beyond that, however, there was also a practicality to their relationship, as most other demons who were vulnerable to lycanthropy hated werewolves and wanted to hunt them, whilst vampires were not only immune, but could use the werewolves as weapons. Relations between werewolves and vampires wasn't always easy, however, as many standard werewolves and Lycanthropus extremis retained the same morality they had as humans, and in some cases hunted vampires the same way they would any demon. Still, at the very least, vampires often gave werewolves protection, and wolverons certainly made great and even affectionate pets and foot soldiers to vampires. The spirits of werewolves were also sent to the vampire's afterlife when they died too, as lichens bore the mark of Khastran, which bound many of his most loyal servants to him in death. Though the souls of lichens were too large and unstable to be sent into his afterlife, sadly the souls of the lesser descendants were much easier to pull in. Another major race to emerge during this time were the Ghouls. These creatures were the creation of the Khardons, locked within the Earth's core. One of their number was able to influence humans on the surface world, eventually transforming them into the first of a hideous race of demons that feasted on flesh. After the creation of the Ghouls, a group of powerful warlocks and witches placed another barrier around the already existing force field surrounding the Earth's core, preventing the demons within from influencing the above world ever again. There were 6 ghoul species in total, and they were all instinctively loyal to vampires, again mirroring their fathers' relationships. The close relationships between vampires, werewolves, and ghouls led to all 3 producing hybrid species, who in turn produced other hybrid species. Ghouls, and all of their hybrid races, were also sent to the vampire's afterlife, after death too. Aside from the descendants and creations of Khastran and the Khardons, other supernatural creatures to emerge in the lost years included zombies and dragons. Whilst both of these lifeforms were magical creatures, resurrecting the dead was not permitted in the age of magic. Granted, we can't say for sure that it didn't happen. Still, the first known zombies, who are simply dead bodies that have been reanimated via magic, were created by renegade warlocks and witches as both slave labour and later as armies to fight back against demons and vampires. However, resurrection spells are difficult to get right, even in the best of times, and with the magic still rare and unstable after Khastran's attack, many of the zombies became feral and monstrous, leading to a zombie plague. Dragons, meanwhile, as we have explored, are merely dinosaurs that have been twisted by magic until they become magical creatures. As far as we know, the lost years marked the first time that dinosaurs were brought back from extinction by humans. They applied resurrection spells to their skeletons buried deep in the ground. Once again, however, many of the dinosaurs were not brought back quite as they were, though at the very least, by the time the dinosaurs were resurrected, the witches' and warlocks' mastery of magic had improved dramatically, so that they weren't zombies. Whilst many of the dinosaurs were simply used as guard dogs, others were transformed into fully fledged dragons. Even then, however, the dragons were intended to be nothing more than glorified servants too, but the magical reptiles soon rebelled and became a powerful force in their own right. In retrospect, it's hard to believe that tiny pockets of humanity survived the horrors of the lost years, which lasted for over 800 years. But eventually, a greater evil than any vampire or demon or zombie visited the dying earth. Set